My assessment was back in the fall of 20, and it remained consistent throughout, that we should keep a steady state of 2,500.
Our military advisors warned against withdrawing on this timeline. They wanted you to keep about 2,500 troops.
No, they didn't. It was split. That wasn't true. That wasn't true.
There was a range of viewpoints, as was evidenced by their testimony today, that were presented to the president, that were presented to his national security team.
We now have commitments from the Taliban to break with al-Qaeda. This is historic.
The legitimate demand of our people and the aim of peace is to end the war and violence through a political settlement.
I think the Doha Agreement and the signing of the Doha Agreement had a really pernicious effect on the government of Afghanistan and on its military.
The international community will unfortunately see for itself that the Taliban will not have met any of their obligations under the Doha Peace Agreement.
As a part of that agreement, we agreed to cease conducting air operations against the Taliban. So the Taliban got stronger.
This has been a 10-year multi-administration drawdown, not a 19-month retrograde or 17-day non-combatant evacuation operation.
Lies, mistakes, failures, and a blame game. America is caught up in a colossal mess of its own making with the flawed Doha Agreement, with the release of Taliban prisoners, a hasty military withdrawal from Afghanistan, a messy evacuation, and a quote-unquote mistaken airstrike. The series of unfortunate events have come back to haunt America and its leaders. The top three American military commanders, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, and the leader of the U.S. Central Command, General Frank McKenzie, sat down for a public, televised and long grilling session with the lawmakers trying to find a name to blame. Which president is to be held responsible? Donald Trump, Joe Biden, or Ashraf Ghani? All these three names came up, and specifically the two American presidents. Towards the end of the two-day Senate hearing, the military leaders narrowed down on the botched-up Doha Agreement after being grilled with over 100 questions regarding logistics, strategy, and taking orders. The top U.S. military brass had one last thing to say.
I think the Doha Agreement and the signing of the Doha Agreement had a really pernicious effect on the government of Afghanistan and on its military. Psychological more than anything else, but we set a date certain for when we were going to leave and when they could expect all assistance to end. So for the first time, there was something out there in front of them.
This has been a 10-year multi-administration drawdown, not a 19-month retrograde or 17-day non-combatant evacuation operation. Under the Doha Agreement, the United States will begin to withdraw its forces contingent upon the Taliban meeting certain conditions, which would lead to a political agreement between the Taliban and the government of Afghanistan. There were 7 conditions applicable to the Taliban and 8 to the United States. While the Taliban did not attack the United States forces, which was one of the conditions, it failed to fully honor any other condition under the Doha Agreement.
On the 29th of February 2020, the Doha Peace Agreement was signed, where the U.S. agreed to withdraw forces within 14 months. The Taliban agreed to cut ties with the al-Qaeda and to not attack U.S. forces in Afghanistan. There were more than 2 conditions to this legal contract: the release of Taliban prisoners. As many as 5,000 were released over months, and the American military has attributed this to the growth of the Taliban army.
As a part of that agreement, we agreed to cease conducting air operations against the Taliban. So the Taliban got stronger. They increased their offensive operations against the Afghan security forces. And the Afghans were losing a lot of people on a weekly basis. In addition to that, we caused them to release 5,000 prisoners, and those prisoners, many of those prisoners went back to fill the ranks of the Taliban. So they got a lot stronger. They continued their attacks. We got smaller.
Not just Donald Trump, but the mistake of Joe Biden has also come out in the open. The two top generals have confessed under oath that they had advised President Joe Biden to keep several thousand troops in Afghanistan. General Mark Milley had proposed keeping at least 2,500 troops in the country. The CENTCOM commander was also in favor of maintaining military presence.
Yes, my assessment was back in the fall of 20, and it remained consistent throughout, that we should keep a steady state of 2,500, and it could bounce up to 3,500, maybe something like that, in order to move toward a negotiated, gated solution.
I recommended that we maintain 2,500 troops in Afghanistan. And I also recommended earlier in the fall of 2020 that we maintain 4,500 at that time. Those are my personal views. I also have a view that the withdrawal of those forces would lead inevitably to the collapse of the Afghan military forces and eventually the Afghan government.
And the White House was caught red-faced after President Joe Biden's confession of not being advised, or his claim, on a famous American news network during a primetime interview. Listen in.
Our military advisors warned against withdrawing on this timeline. They wanted you to keep about 2,500 troops.
No, they didn't. It was split. That wasn't true.
Although the White House tried to minimize the impact of the congressional testimony, the confessions, the revelations, and the testimonies were broadcast live for the world to analyze the great American power and judgment, especially for the people of Afghanistan who are bearing the consequences of this unending series of American mistakes.